want to go through the goals and policies pretty quickly here. But they are important because they do set the background on what it is that Missoula aspires to be and aspires to provide for quality of life for its citizens. One of them is a wide range of opportunities. That's goal 1. Goal 2 is an equitable distribution of parklands so that not just those who happen to live near parks have access to them, but everybody does. Goal 3 has to do with providing things as a city and county that have community-wide significance. Not things that serve just one special purpose or one neighbor, and so you need to focus on the broader issues. This goal really relates to developing and maintaining those things that are part of that community green infrastructure in a way that you can be proud of and that meets the needs of the community. Clearly, Missoula has a very strong environmental ethic, and it pervades the entire document that comes through all sorts of ways to enhance the natural environment with parks and trails and other things. We need to be careful that everything that we do is achievable. So we have to have adequate tools for acquisition, development, and maintenance to make this plan a reality, or it sits on the shelf. And then the last goal really has to do with checking back in, making sure, again, it's that flexibility factor. This part of the planning process has to be trying to integrate this with the comprehensive plan, neighborhood plans, and other planning processes that were on that big list. The overall comprehensive plan for the community attempts to describe the future from a land use standpoint, gets a little bit into parks, but this builds upon that and tries to identify where future growth areas are going to occur. This particular data set came from the transportation plan that talked about where, and infrastructure planning as well, where you're predicting growth and dwelling units are going to occur in the future, and therefore can try to anticipate that growth. With this data set and this analysis that were done, there are some areas that are really, the yellow areas are existing residential development. Then these peach colors areas out in here are areas that are expected to expand and have developments coming in either the very near future or within the next 20 years. From a park classification and standard standpoint, we went full circle on this and talked about what the choices are for the types of elements that go into this kit of parks we're talking about. Probably the backbone of that system from a park standpoint is the neighborhood parks. Those are the parks like Bonner and others that people are so fond of, and people can go to them and get out of their own little yards and commune with your neighbors and walk and watch other people and do many other kinds of things. As part of this plan, one of the recommendations, and I'm sort of jumping to the end because it has to do with how you classify your system, is to have a parkland acreage standard, 2.5 acres per 1,000 population. That helps you adjust to population growth and figure out how you're going to provide parks based on population. With larger parks, we're able to do things that you can't do in small little pocket parks. And so we've set a standard of 5 to 12 acres. And a half-mile service radius, which is about a 10-minute walk. That at the very least, everybody should have access to parks in that sort of manner. Pocket parks are a subset of neighborhood parks. The group went back and forth a lot about what ought to happen with pocket parks. They're important when you don't have a choice and you can't get larger parks in the city system. But they don't really substitute for the need for the larger parks. They also, and quite honestly, in a lot of communities, are really a big drain on maintenance and operations of city systems because you have to pick up your equipment and haul it from 1 acre park down the street to the next acre park, down the street to the next. Missoula actually has quite a proliferation of very small parks. compared to the larger parks. And it has honestly been a challenge for the departments to keep up with that. Community parks are larger parks, more destination-oriented. People may drive to them. They certainly need to be connected with a larger community-wide trail system. The standard that is recommended as part of this plan is 4.5 acres per 1,000 population. It's where you're going to put things like some active sports fields, some amphitheaters, water features, other things, larger community festival areas, all sorts of facilities you can imagine that your community might need as it grows. And this kind of parkland standard will allow you to add those kinds of things and be a little flexible as generations change and Missoula grows and changes. It has a 1.5 mile service radius, and sports complexes are only one type of community park, but would not like to see your city go entirely towards sports complexes as its definition of what a community park should be, because there's so many other activities that the community participates in. Regional parks are typically parks that are big. You know, they may have fairgrounds, they may have historic sites, they may have a lot of natural features to them, and they're often the result of a partnership between several different agencies. They're kind of an anomaly, but they're large regional draws. So we don't include them per se in a parkland standard. They're created out of necessity for certain facilities that are to occur in a community. Visual green spaces is one of those elements that was defined in the open space plan. They're the areas that make the community visually attractive. I think the city needs to be careful that it doesn't pick up every little corner as a visual green space, and that what you need to do is focus your concentrated efforts on those that really, again, have community-wide significance. Conservation areas are those areas that were so eloquently described in your open space plan. They're the ones with the most highest natural values, and that plan went a long ways towards identifying cornerstone conservation areas throughout the community that you're still working on to achieve. The focus was really on natural resource preservation. It has uses, public uses and other things, but that's really the focus, with not very much facility development and things like irrigated lawns and things like that. And then connecting all these things together, greenways and trails connections and so on. The non-motorized transportation plan describes them as core commuter trails, neighborhood connectors, primitive trails which are non-paved and quite narrow, usually only 2 feet wide or something. And then sort of the secondary level is on-street walks and bike lanes that connect everybody together in a more urban fashion. And then lastly, there's common areas. Typically and ideally, common areas are held in private ownership through homeowners associations or other mechanisms, residential special improvement districts or other things that provide buffers and may conserve areas that have nice natural values and other things to them. But I don't think they should not be confused with what parklands are, which are community gathering areas and other things. And then you have also non-conforming lands. This was a challenge in our book, is to come up with, you guys have over the years have received several different properties through the development process that are either in excess of the standards that are needed in a community, sort of leftover lots, and several other pieces around that we hear off and on that there may be issues with weed control or other things. And so we've chosen to call them non-conforming as part of this plan. We went through extensive mapping. I think one of the greatest things that came out of this whole process was getting the city's inventory in shape. It was really a focus of the plan. There was a lot of work done with David and others to pull together the parcels and get them mapped and come up with the inventory. Now you have a database you could build upon that didn't exist prior. And I can't remember exactly how many properties there are, 140 something like that. It's a massive list. So it's a good thing. And we've mapped all the trails and the cornerstone areas and other things like that. We analyzed service areas. If you remember the community park service area, this bluish green, it reads better on the wall maps, outlines those parks which are considered community parks, and that area basically there serves the majority of the urban Missoula area pretty well by the definition of community parks. Neighborhood parks are a little bigger challenge. Your city has a lot of different arterials and barriers that go at different directions. You know, the rail lines, arterial roadways, rivers that prevent people from easily getting to some neighborhood parks. So when we went through the analysis, we looked at the entire urban area, but David, if you'd go to the next slide, please. When you zoom in to sort of the core area, you can see how the analysis shakes out. These are the half-mile and quarter-mile radii around neighborhood and pocket parks. And they were clipped at arterial roadways and at rail lines that you can't get through, or rivers that you can't get across. So when you actually see what areas of the city are served adequately, or actually served at all, you can see there are some areas that are not. What we also did was go into census tract data and analyze the actual population within each of these areas and calculate a level of service. The colors mean if there's nothing over them, of course they have no parks. The red is about half an acre to 1.4 acres per thousand. This is 1.5 to 2.4, 2.5 to 3.4, and 3.5 and above. So clearly these on the upper range, the blue, the green, some of these areas like this, are some of the better served areas in the community. These are marginal. They're right in the range, but not quite up to existing standards, park standards that we're recommending. And those here in the red are lacking. They have some, but are lacking. So this helped. We kind of knew this intuitively, but until we did the analysis, we didn't actually have the data to support it. It was a very interesting part of the process. We looked at other communities. It's always nice to know what other people are doing, just to compare. People come and go from different communities, and we looked at 10 of them. We compared their level of service standards and some of the provision of specific recreational facilities. So how many sports fields did they have, and so on and so forth. Next slide. The data was a lot more complicated than even this. But what it comes up with is there's sports facilities kind of up here. We have parkland comparisons. We compared maintenance staff, areas maintained, and budgets as well. David? What we found out is neighborhood parkland level of service is somewhat similar in these other 10 communities. The average of other communities was 1.9 acres per thousand. Missoula area had 1.9 acres. Missoula City had 2.5 acres. Now you know from the previous analysis that all of that is not equitably distributed necessarily across the city. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. But by and large, served pretty well. The community parkland, you guys are actually doing a little better than a lot of other communities are. That's probably thankful. You know, you ought to be thanking the forefathers and the people who were so generous in a donation of some of those big lands to start with. The next question is, where's your next big park going to come from? And how are you going to get that for future development? But what's also interesting is that your maintenance budget's the lowest per capita of all the cities. It's about half of the average. Next slide. We also found some other things. Skate parks. Other communities are into that. Soccer, you're a little lower. Ball fields, you're similar, but your fields are too small. Pools, you guys are already going to have that handled with your aquatics program and what's going to happen in the very near future here. Gyms, indoor gyms or field houses, you don't have any sort of public city facilities, and you're right on the cusp with your size of really needing some facility that's like that. You have a lot more tennis courts than most other cities. And this is a trend. Golf and inline hockey are certainly growing in popularity throughout skate parks and other things like that. Yes?
I have a clarification question.
Mm-hmm.
All the numbers you're giving us right now are where we're at with today's population.
Yes, that's right. We looked at national state trends. I'm not going to go into that in detail at all. We looked, but more importantly, we talked specifically to the residents in this Missoula urban area. It was a random sample, had great response rate, sampling area of plus or minus 5%. By and large, the community's pretty well satisfied. They're certainly not dissatisfied with the overall park system, conservation, lands, trails, or maintenance overall. They're not way up on this end, but they aren't dissatisfied. So you're doing a pretty good job. Do you have enough of particular kind of facilities? The interesting thing here is over 50% said there's not enough indoor cultural facilities. It's a pretty large percentage of the population. And the second highest was about 35% for natural conservation lands. And developed parks was about in the 20% range. Maybe the people in the 20% range were those who didn't live in those areas that were served well by parks. We couldn't go to that level of analysis to know that or not. What kind of parks were people's favorites? Over here, these big pie chunks, I think tell a pretty good story. Greeno, which is pretty natural. Caris, which is known as the community gathering park. And Bonner, which also has some wonderful features in it. What do people do in park? If you look at these three bars over here, that indicates the frequency of use. This other bar is don't use at all. Trail system and passive use is overwhelmingly the most frequent use. What do people do in parks? Now others may be involved in certain things and they may do it quite frequently. So there may be a lot of use by a smaller group of people. It doesn't mean that's not important. It just means that's just the way it is. Okay. And when you talked about what children do in parks, they have recreational swimming, walking, hiking, soccer, golf. Up here, I think that's a Tiger Woods phenomenon. I don't know. It's very interesting to me. But again, there's a pretty active use in here for soccer but walking and hiking is one of the higher ones as well. But swimming, like I said, you guys are already going to deal with that. What was all? Oh, sorry, David, real quickly. I don't want to take too long on this. But if you look, what was interesting to me is these are the families with children is over here. Half don't use park and half do. I don't know what they're doing if they're not using parks, but maybe they aren't doing it with their kids. You know, maybe maybe it's not a family thing. The kids are maybe going out and hanging out with their friends and doing other things. We didn't ask what the kids were doing who didn't use parks, but that was kind of interesting. Okay. David? I think what's a more pointed question is what there's not enough of. Swimming pools, teen recreation centers. My eyes are going. Outdoor swimming, wading pools, skate parks, dog-specific areas, sculpture, public exercise, fitness equipment, outdoor facilities for performance and festivals, arts and crafts, wildlife, nature, all of those kinds of things. They tell us that there's clearly this is 56% up here. This drops down to like 39%, but that's still a pretty darn significant percentage of your population, considering not everybody does everything, right? So when you look at it another way, and you say, for those who did have opinion, some of the strongest things that came out, because people may have not known, and they may not have had teens, but the people who had an opinion about teen recreation centers, 87% of them said, we need them. And this, it's not to say these other aren't important, but these definitely changed their positions and importance based on the strongness of the opinion held by the group, if that makes any sense. Arts and crafts facilities, inline hockey rinks, and senior recreation centers also emerged as priorities. We contacted user groups. They were recreation providers, conservation organizations, and other kinds of user groups. Most are pretty happy. Maintenance of facilities was most frequent comments. Even though by and large the general public says they're pretty happy with maintenance, we did get some survey comments that said maintenance was an issue. And restrooms came up frequently. And conservation groups and service organizations are very active and use the parks a lot and are interested in the parks and open space areas. David? Now, if you go through all of those things that go into the needs assessment, trails and walking paths are the highest priorities for the residents. Multi-purpose recreation or leisure center is in demand. Parkland level of service overall is adequate, but low in select areas. Softball and soccer fields of adequate size and quality needed. For example, softball is probably okay if you replace the ones you've got that are short outfields, but soccer fields are in demand right now, between 6 to 9 fields now and more in the very near future. Skateboarding, inline hockey, dog parks are in demand. Park maintenance is an issue. With facility quality, weed control and invasive species, and additional river access is desired. So when you look at this, I'll go to this little red circle over here. This is neighborhood parks. Right now, if you talk about the urban area level of service at 2.5 acres per thousand, you need 5 to 9 parks just based on population. If you look at it in another 15 to 20 years, you're going to need 14 to 20 parks. If you look at community parks, you're right in there. You're real close to what you need. 31 acres behind. You need 1 park in the near future sometime. But over this next 15 to 20 years, you could easily use a total of 2 or 3. So we came up with a master plan that conceptually located those. Some of it's not conceptually located because you own the park sites. So you say, okay, we might as well go and develop those. Other ones are conceptually located because we don't know where that land exists, and you don't want to put your asterisk right over somebody's private property, you know, without knowing and talking to that person and see if it's available. So we've located a lot of that. If you want to zoom in, the next one. So these blue asterisks are all these neighborhood parks. Some of them, like I said, are projects to expand or enhance existing properties. Others are new projects. Some of them are cooperations with the school, like up here in the Rattlesnake. The school district owns property that in meetings with them they said they didn't need. So maybe that's a good site. And then areas out in this direction where a lot of the population is going as well. We also show existing and planned trails. We show conservation areas, which are the cornerstones that you're continuing to try to acquire. I think that's it. Oh, and river access points. And, and also, you should look at that. We can come back to that. There's little connections to various parks that will improve connections to and from neighborhoods in the event that parks aren't available. Does that make sense? So you can get across those arterial roadways, or you might have at-grade or grade-separated crossings along the trail system and some other things like that. So to summarize, neighborhood parks, 14 to 20 needed. 26 are shown on the master plan. That's just based on population growth. But we have this because there's some areas that are currently underserved. Go on. Let's community parks. McCormick Park has a master plan. Recommends that that be realized, as well as the Fort Missoula Park master plan. Playfair Park could be a better community park if it had some other elements or things that people said, if they didn't pick it as their favorite park. A lot of the comments were it had too much active sports and not enough for some other people. Big Sky Park, it's in a very strategic location to serve growing areas to the west. And there are ways probably that park can be more attractive to the larger community around it. And then additional community parks. We already talked about recreation center. Trail connections continue to be important. River access points, we show 11 on there. And then conservation lands as a priority, again, to implement that open space plan. We have actions. They're on the back as well. That's part of the process that Don will explain in a minute. But we have actions out of this that we want to say, this is what we're going to do now. Some of them are planning, meaning what do you need to do to get your act together to make decisions. One of them is management plans. For these properties, such as your conservation lands, Mount Jumbo, Mount Sentinel, Noah Hills, and things like that, if you have a management plan, you can figure out where additional elements might be developed, additional trails are appropriate, areas that you shouldn't be going into, and so on and so forth. As well as management plans for parks as well, so that they don't become loved to death, so to speak, and create problems for neighborhoods. We already talked about master plans, continued trails planning, planning for this future leisure or recreation center, and then coordinating, making sure there's interdepartmental coordination on the neighborhood plans as they develop in growing areas. Upgrades and maintenance actions, update parks to ADA and safety standards, make sure that we have invasive species in control, or at least, in control, and establish maintenance standards for the parks that you can live up to and that are achievable. Administrative actions, that's sort of Donna's job and the other staff within the city and county. Have an annual report card that says, how are you doing? Update subdivision ordinances to be in compliance with this plan, because currently there are a few disconnects in there. Keep up on the work that's been done to date on the database. Make sure that the systems are in place for coordinating. And transferring county parks within the city limits to city ownership and management. Funding actions. These are very much condensed. There's a lot more detail on the items on the wall, so I invite you to make sure that you look at those. But one of those is considering a bond issue to acquire parkland in advance of assessing the level of community support for local option sales tracts, development fees, or other things for implementation. Partnering with the school districts, doing a little bit of that right now, but formalizing agreements. You have some non-conforming lands. Are there ways that they can be used differently? Can they be traded? Can they be sold? You know, what can happen with those lands? We don't have the answers right now. And then explore the feasibility of special districts or park district. The park district would be a separate governmental entity that sort of overlays city and county. It has its own tax base that's not rolled into the general funds of the city and county. So it's one way to sort of separate it out from other functions of the government. Other communities use it, others don't. So that's the master plan in a nutshell. I know we went through it pretty fast. I'm going to turn it back to Dawn.
I think since we're not on tape, I can yell for you. Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do with the rest of the evening is, I know there's a few people that need to leave right away for other meetings and projects that they're working on. So, with the rest of the group that's here, I'd like to break this down into about 4 groups. And what would be great is if we could have an equal number of council members, county city staff, city county park board members, and citizen advisory committee members within each of those groups. And what we'd like to do with those smaller groups is give you an opportunity to really get into understanding some of the goals and the policies that go with them, talk a little bit about the actions, the implementation actions, and then the potential tools that we could use. We'll have a different facilitator for each of your groups. We want to get all of your comments up on one of the different easels, and at the end of our evening, share some of those ideas and thoughts with each other, give you all a chance to walk around the room and stick dots and put notes wherever you want to do that. But mainly give each of you an opportunity to interact with somebody from another agency or from the Citizens Advisory Committee or from the staff on a more intimate level so we get some of your ideas out. We do have, during transition time here, we have snacks up front for you, water on ice, because we know you're here over your meal time and we appreciate that. And what I'm going to ask Lisa and Dale and David and Jackie, if you would. By the way, Jackie's the new staff member of Parks and Recreation. She's our new open space acquisition and grants manager. so we're going to ask her to go to work with us right away. If I could ask the four of you to sort some chairs out and make 4 small groups. And I'll let the rest of the group go ahead and look at maps, grab snacks, and how about if we reconvene at about 5 after 5 into our smaller groups. And then I'll set you up with discussion items at that time. Thank you. I think that would be nice.
The bottom one.
The bottom one. There it goes.
And please eat all the food because I can't take it home.
I'm over here. I'm in the food line. Yeah, that's like
Lisa, immediately grab the table in the corner over here. And David, where's your group meeting? David's group is meeting over by the flag. And where's Dale? I think Dale was setting up this station, and Jackie, you're right here. Jackie's over here. So feel free to join a group, and we'll get going. Start our discussion right off the questionnaire, and what I'd like the facilitators to discuss with their group to open this up is, let's get a list of what folks feel most please them about the Master Park Plan process, the findings and recommendations. Or what things, or in addition, do you find the most interesting or significant from the information you heard tonight? So this is just to kind of get everybody warmed up and thinking about the Master Park Plan. So if our facilitators could look at questions 1 and 2 and go ahead and list responses. All the participants are also welcome to fill one of these out before they leave or take it with them. And I've had a lot of citizens who take these kinds of things with them and send us back a whole book, which is great because they're usually full of a lot of great ideas. And then we'll move on to some different questions throughout the evening. We're going to try and spend about 10 minutes per question set, so I need the facilitators to try and get the group involved. We'll share our comments at the end of the evening.
back verbally that I saw was a possible strong correlation between census tracts by income level and all level of service. We'll overlay the census tracts by income level on map 3, you see an exact correlation, just like the school closure. What looks like consistent, and it was never mentioned explicitly in the plan. If you look at map 3 and it jumps off that, there's a strong correlation between census tract levels and level of service. So I'm advocating for a number of reasons. One, both for on the equity side, the low level income tracts need to be rated for higher levels of service. They haven't historically had any level of service whatsoever. In addition, the loans in Montvale and my neighborhood need shared common and green space more because people live there. They not have cars, they may not have recreational parking, and so this was not mentioned in the plan explicitly. People from the highest income areas have the highest access to public recreation resources and the lowest income levels at the least. I think that needs to be corrected. Are you surprised? In a simple way, no. Absolutely not. So, well, that wasn't discussed. It's very surprising. One is what is the current level of service for the areas Thanks for breaking that up. That's absolutely what I'm saying. But the goal should actually be way to provide higher levels of service for
David, I'm not sure. So that's a part from the prioritizing those rights where they are at the lower level.
Well, that's an interesting kind of thing. I would think it becomes a prioritization. I didn't see it. I mean, it turns out the neighborhood was but it was given a high priority in places. But I don't think it was based on the consideration of high level.
The same, your brother,
Take back the street.
those two contiguous areas are the focus of the present part. And if you look at the map, there is a red area still provided parking surrounded by the street. And it's quite a large area.
On each of your issues, one of the things that did come up in the groups is that you are too late to give input. That's certainly not so. I won't want anybody to misinterpret the presentation as this is the final. Even the Citizens Advisory Committee that's been involved in this for 4 to 6 hours once a month doesn't feel like it's their final. They're here to hear you. And so I would encourage you to, take that opportunity to be heard. That's why we're hosting this meeting. And it's why we didn't go immediately to a public hearing, because we want to hear what you have to say before we take it to that next step. So with that, I'd encourage you to wrap up on questions 1 and 2 and move into chapter 4, so we have an opportunity to look at some of the goals and policies. And this may be a place within the document where you'd like to insert some additional statements that you see as important for the Citizens Advisory Committee to consider. And because there's 7 goals, I'm going to break this up a little bit, where David's group will look at goals 1 and 5. Dale's group will look at goals 2 and 6. Jackie's group will look at goal 3 and 7. And Lisa, I have 4 and 7 for your group. Thanks. I do have one announcement. We had several people join us after the PowerPoint presentation. That same PowerPoint presentation will happen at 7:30 at the planning board meeting. So if you want to hang out with the rest of us, you're welcome to stay or come back for that. Okay. Some of the groups are ready to move into implementation actions. So, David, your group's ready? Projects, upgrades, and maintenance. Jackie, when your group's ready to move into actions, would you look at administration and management? Chapter 5, Section A, administration and management actions. And it's question 4. Okay, David's group is on projects and upgrades and maintenance. There's 2 action items there. And Dale's group has got in Chapter 5, Section A, planning actions. Planning. And at the same time, I'm going to hand out the next topic. So for David, in Chapter 5, administrative structure as a tool. For Dale, in Chapter 5, revenue sources as a tool. Jackie, regulatory and land use policy as a tool. Chapter 5, Section B, Question 5. You're doing regulatory, there you go. And Lisa, that leaves you with land acquisitions. Okay, if the groups could kind of get their boards so they face the middle of the room so we can all share information, that would be great. And assign a spokesperson, and that might be your group facilitator, or you can choose someone else. We really only have about 5 minutes for a brief presentation from each group. So I'd suggest that you might want to start where you ended, and how come you ended that way? What supporting information or comments were made. So we really encourage you to summarize sort of the essence of your discussion. We'll be taking all these notes down and sharing it with the Citizens Advisory Committee for their review. Jack? Okay, Dale's going to present this group's discussion in brief.
Okay, briefly, the good things that people thought about the plan were that the goals reflect the community, some of the community values, especially environmental values. We sort of briefly moved through the good things and got into how to improve the plan. And so some of the big issues that came up with the goals were the correlation between income levels and level of service that seemed to appear on some of the maps, but doesn't appear to be something that's consciously included in the plan that recognizes that certain lower income areas may be inadequately served. And another big issue relative to goals was that pocket parks aren't emphasized enough. And on the one hand, it's clear that there is a big problem with maintenance of these small areas, and yet it's also clear in the plan that the maintenance budget for the Parks Department is very low compared to other similar communities. So, you know, those are both problems, and so the solution of saying fewer pocket parks is also a budgetary solution that could be solved through budgetary means.
But we said that wasn't necessarily a good idea.
Right, right, and so it seems like that pocket parks should, if it were possible to maintain those pocket parks, that they shouldn't be excluded as much as maybe they have been in the plan. Is that fair to say? Okay. Making sure that for the community park designations that the distance of 1.5 miles takes into consideration barriers to access like road crossings, that you may be able to physically cross Russell Street, but you have to scurry across it. So is it really is it a friendly crossing? That should be taken into consideration as it is for the neighborhood parks. Thank you. And for goal number 6, the question of is cash in lieu an effective funding source? And that is sort of looking at how state law interprets cash in lieu and fair market value, and is that really the best that it could be? Also concerned that in terms of what gets approved by the county commissioners or the city council, that having more teeth in the comments that are provided by citizens, the park board, and neighborhood plans, and allowing that information to really result in a decision that reflects that rather than it just being for naught. And these are some language things that rather than the first section in Chapter 5A, the first bullet says analyze and should be continue to analyze, and I think that idea of continuing to evaluate what the plan is accomplishing. Also, going back to that idea of equitability in level of service, is it really addressed in the plan? And to prioritize areas for park acquisition rather than just simply identifying them, that maybe having some sort of prioritization should be important as well. Also not really clear, and maybe this is defined in the plan that I didn't see it, is what is the multi-purpose recreation center? Where is it defined and addressed in the plan? And also, what are the species of concern? And the last section was implementation tools, revenue sources, and that use fees. One of the things that folks are concerned about is the idea of a toll booth at the Kim Williams Trail. Like, should there be, a place where you're using a park and it's going to cost you, and yet it's public? But for other facilities that clearly sort of require maintenance, that fee is more acceptable. And then also just being clear about impact fees for new development, not for existing development, and then this notion of land swaps between publicly owned land and privately owned land, and using that to implement the park plan. And did I miss things? No.
Thanks. You guys had a really good discussion. Appreciate it.
Jackie, as her first opportunity, she didn't know I was going to make her do this tonight, so I apologize.
Late. Yeah. Okay. I was going to start on, we analyzed goal 3 and what we felt the priority should be on goal 3, but I'm just going to mention that one of the things that somebody mentioned that was a really great thing, and that was the joint coordination between the county and city, which is so important when we're talking about a big area. We can't just look at the city. We need to bring the county in as well. Our goal 3 that we looked at reads, provide parklands, trails, and recreational facilities that have neighborhood and community-wide significance. And under that, there were 7 policies that we had to think about ranking. And the first 2 policies were so connected to each other, and we felt they were of high priority. The first one was acquire and develop neighborhood community parks in accordance with the standards. And the second was acquire and develop trail corridors and connectors to connect those parks. And we saw those as equally important and of high priority. Then also, we had a feeling that 3.7, which was consider selling, trading, or converting the use of selected small, underutilized, underdeveloped lands. And we saw that as being connected to number 1. Number 1 is acquire parks, and number 3 is maybe selling parks that aren't, that are just like maybe half-acre, 1-acre little pocket parks that aren't being used and they're difficult to maintain. So first of all, you save money by getting rid of the maintenance, and then you hopefully make some money to go back to goal number 1, which is acquire parks and develop parks. So that's how we saw the how to rank those policies. Mm-hmm.
Is there an opportunity to ask a question? We were kind of debated about that.
Go ahead, Bill. What's your question?
How would you determine, whether it was suitable to be sold instead of just underused? That one of those open spaces could provide an important visual buffering capability or something else. It seems to me we hit on that and said, boy, it's impossible to assess.
The CHC, Citizens Advisory Committee, and the staff have discussed that at length, and I think what our consensus is we would have to develop sort of a matrix or criteria that would establish whether or not, what values it had and how it would score, sort of like a rough cut matrix on open space acquisitions, only more extensive. And then at that point, and the best example I can share with you is actually one from Great Falls where they did a matrix. They determined they were going to sell a parcel, and they never ended up selling it because what they found out is that they were actually able to find citizens who were willing to keep that in the park system. It became an educational experience. There's not enough funding. Therefore, we're going to bring forth more resources to make sure we hang on to this parcel. And then there's other situations that I've seen created. We have some cul-de-sacs that literally are very, very tiny that become extensions of people's backyards. And maybe in that situation, if there's not a trail connector, if there's not a view shed, if we go through the matrix and everything fails, the appropriate thing is to get that back on the tax records and then use those funds to develop the park that's across the street. So that's the thinking, and we have a long way to go in developing the matrix to make it work effectively.
Yeah, would you envision there would be some kind of public review then?
Oh, yeah,
to kind of
absolutely.
something?
Yep. I could see one of our existing boards or a new board, and, we certainly know that we have a lot of different levels. We have open space advisory committee, we have park board, we have neighborhood council, and so on. You bet.
Okay, our next goal was goal 7. And goal 7, it's kind of a lengthy one. It says monitor, assess, and adjust the existing intergovernmental agreements, tools, goals, policies, action plan, and priorities to meet changing or unforeseen conditions and or needs in the Missoula area. Under that one, there were 4 policies, and we looked at that one and said this one wasn't really as, this one I think we struggled with a little bit more as seeing the importance overall of this goal as compared to other goals. But anyway, we came that the annual assessment, seeing how the park plan is being implemented, the annual report card is being the highest priority, always keeping aware of how the parks plan is doing. The next thing we had was the implementation and tools, and our tools were administrative. Let me flip to that. Okay, so ours were regulatory tools and land use planning. And when we looked at the list of, there's 10 items under that, we noticed right away that a lot of the tools were more what you would consider guidelines, because they had to do with comprehensive plans, neighborhood plans, transportation plans. So those are all tools that, as I understand what they were trying to get at here with this list, is that you would want to make sure that your comp plans, your neighborhood plan, your transportation plans had the same, they had identified maybe some of the same areas that the park plan has identified as important places for maybe acquiring in the future. So you would want them to match up. But understanding that comprehensive plans are guidelines. They're not enforceable like regulations and zoning is. So the next list had to do... Okay. Oh, did I skip over something? Sorry. Since I'm on a roll on this one, I'm going to finish this one up. Okay. The next list under this regulatory tools had to do with reviewing all different types of regulations, zoning regulations, subdivision regulations, to see if those regulations should be revised to help implement these new park policies in this new plan. And we all felt strongly that having something that was enforceable was really important, making that a priority to review something that could be actually enforceable versus a guideline like a plan. But just the fact is that you would have to have a committee that would review those regulations and see, okay, do the subdivision regs or the zoning regs actually need to be revised to implement these park plan policies? Because if any of you are aware of Growth Management 2, it takes a very long time to get regulations changed and revised and go through the whole public policy and meetings and everything. So it seemed to us that we needed to evaluate, do they need to be changed or not? And that would be done hopefully by some kind of committee, and I don't know who, but we saw that as a priority. The last one was in this policy list for tools was new mechanisms for acquiring parkland dedications in advance of subdivision and creating future development proposals for an equivalent parkland dedication at the time of actual subdivision. We looked at that as being proactive, looking ahead to the future, trying to keep ahead of the development curve. So we saw that as a real high priority. Again, this is something that would have to be more fleshed out. How are we going to do that? What's the mechanism going to be for that? Maybe the mechanism for that will end up in zoning. Zoning, again, being an enforceable tool versus a plan that's a guideline. And Mike, what else did we?
Yeah,
The
we
last
looked at
thing.
that. Well, back
Oh.
on 5.3 was actually page 5-3, administrative and management actions, which you covered pretty much. It was the annual report card and integrating and reviewing the subdivision regulations.
Right.
So then it was just the last.
And the last thing, the suggestions, this is kind of where we petered out. In all honesty, we agreed again that we got to review those subdivision regs. And then just the whole park plan needs to kind of have an edit to kind of make it more cohesive. It's, I guess to some people it's sounding like it's coming together by a whole bunch of people, which it is, but the way it's reading is a little choppy, I guess. So they were just thinking maybe if one person was actually looking at the entire document as a whole and trying to edit it that way, maybe it will read a little bit smoother. But I think that's it.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, your whole group. I heard a lot of laughter. David, you ready?
The first requests, the first two questions, we just kind of lumped it all together, and some of the parts of the plan that we're pleased with and that we're somewhat revealing tonight one was that the plan did reveal what areas of the city and what neighborhoods were deficient for park needs. We're somewhat surprised that there was a documented need or interest in additional indoor recreation space, and that was kind of borne out with the aquatics bond. We'd like to see that connectivity was a priority for the citizens. We were somewhat concerned about the low level of senior citizen involvement in our parks programs and our access to our parks and trails, and kind of extended that to other diverse groups and families. Some of the things that we thought could be improved on a little bit, what some of the findings pointed out that concerned us were that perhaps connectivity would replace park acquisition, and we understand that in a place where there's a physical barrier that limits the level of service for a park, possibly a grade separated crossing extends that level of service, but we didn't want that necessarily to be the mechanism in lieu of park acquisition. We thought that it was important to continue exploiting the partnerships. The level of service analysis that was done was helpful, and I think it could be extended further across the city population, but it was really a helpful tool for looking at equitable distribution of parkland. One thing that kept coming up was that we needed a lot of money to implement anything, and from, I think, a lot of our standpoints, whether we know it or not, having one map with all the parks on it is long overdue. Okay, goal 1, provide a wide range of recreation and leisure time opportunities for all citizens and visitors in Missoula. And we felt that of all the 5 policies listed here, it was still most important that we acquire parkland. And we put that ahead of anything else, that if we don't acquire land now, we're not going to have land to develop. We're not going to have land to worry about issues of ADA accessibility or any other issues listed. And so that just floated right to the top. And goal 5 was to protect and enhance natural environment and develop parks, trails, and outdoor recreational facilities in an environmentally sensitive manner. And it seemed like a lot of the policies didn't quite fit the goal. So a lot of them seem that they may be covered by different agencies, maybe county extension agency or public works. We're dealing with stormwater management, things like that. So what we thought, one of the most important of the 9 policies was develop and implement comprehensive resource management plans, but we extended this to be management plans for, and actually kind of diminished the importance of conservation land because it wasn't really a focus of this plan. But develop and implement neighborhood, regional, and community park management plans, and kind of inherent in that is an asset database, an inventory and monitoring of what we have. And if that's included in that goal, that's really important for us to be able to establish priorities for, budget items for park maintenance and even acquisition. So I think that was probably the most important part of that. And that, yeah, just that it seemed like it was straying away from the neighborhood park issues. And maybe that was just some words that were dropped from the plan, but. And under implementation actions in Chapter 5, we dealt with project actions. And there was a huge list there. Most of the things that we felt that they were good ideas, but again, what floated to the top was that any discussion of acquisition go right to the top of the list, and that perhaps development, be tied in with acquisition, but still we're more concerned with getting the parkland at this point. Is that covering that part, Paul?
We were talking about that in two ways: to generally acquire in the urban area, but also to raise priority to work with developers to acquire and develop the adequately sized and appropriately located neighborhood parks so that we could bring that to a high priority specifically.
The next issue was Chapter 4, and we dealt with administrative structures. And this paragraph dealt, our discussion kind of centered around the whole idea of a tax or a park district. And we had a good discussion about it, and I think one concern, the concern that kept coming up was that with a high rental population in the city, that they have some say in anything that comes up that ultimately determines what their monthly bill is going to be, and that it not just all be on the right of the property tax or the property owner to vote on park districts, which I think it is how it could be implemented according to our legal counsel and our group. And so the discussion kind of went back and forth that in general elections, anybody can vote on things that raise property taxes for tax owners, but on the other hand, this is a kind of unusual opportunity for it to go the other direction. And so the concern was that everybody probably have a voice in the end result. Yeah, and what was attractive about it was that it would ensure a long-term revenue stream for parks. And then these last two issues that we thought needed some improvement in the plan, we thought that really before we start, that we need to have some way of critically analyzing all the revenue tools to see what is really feasible, given our demographic, our location, our interests, so that we're not spending a lot of time and money trying to implement something that's not going to be passed. And I think one of our issues that came up was similar to what your group came up with, was that how many of the things that we've identified as directions or goals in the plan are based on our shying away from the fiscal problems that we're facing. And that maybe we need to look at, because we have heard quite a bit of talk about how much people like the pocket parks and how important they are to the neighborhood character, but we shy away from it because they do cost us a lot of money. And so I think the public probably deserves to see a critical financial analysis of how much those are costing us, but also how much revenue we would have to generate if those are so important that we need to hire more people to take care of those. So it seemed like some things were wagging the dog that maybe the public wouldn't necessarily like. And I guess that we have a more critical and quantifiable prediction of what our maintenance costs are. So when we look at acquiring future parks, we know what we can expect in future maintenance costs. And then to wrap it up, we felt like the plan, just like a lot of other plans, isn't right now linked to really the complexity of what goes on in our community. That one of the things that Phil gave was the example of, we have school closures happening next to areas that are used as parkland, and we have maybe a urban transportation budget or for urban transit that's not going to be able to meet our needs down the road. And all these things really have to be pulled together. And one suggestion was that maybe that the school district map or the outlines be an overlay on the whole, or on one of these maps, and so we can see, where are all the kids going, where are they being bused or driven or walking to school, and that plays into the connectivity and possibly some of the park siding decisions. And then it gets down to implementation also. How much dedication is there and commitment on the part of staff and council and citizens to see this implemented? Or it's just going to be another nice plan on a bookshelf somewhere.
Okay, Lisa, can you wrap us up? I'm going to give the mic to Lisa. What I want you to know is the planning board starts at 7:30. So once Lisa completes hers, feel free to spend your dots if that's what you want to do. There's sticky notes up here. There's additional questionnaires. There's additional food. And we'll have till about 7:25, but what I'm going to have staff do is put this room together for the planning board meeting. And also, if you weren't here for the PowerPoint presentation, you can watch it at that time if you like. And again, thank you to everyone for all your hard work tonight.
Okay, our group was responsible to look at goals 4 and 7, and under the implementation, we looked at funding actions, and under the implementation tools, we looked at land acquisition strategies. And what we did is we tried to take all of our thoughts and put them into some summary bullets, and I'm just going to go through those. A lot of what our group discussed, I've heard discussed here with other groups, so I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we were all thinking some of the same thoughts here. But some of our main points is there was some discussion about an interest in putting some responsibility on developers for developing parks. We discussed impact fees a bit and other strategies on how we could do that. We talked about the need to have more funding to implement the parks plan. So much of what's presented here is going to depend on finding adequate funding and appropriate funding. There was some interest in our group on the revolving fund and exploring that as an option for a funding source. We also had strong support for coordination between agencies, specifically the city and county parks, to achieve some of the goals. And so much of this here is interrelated. But we also talked about trying to reduce unfunded mandates. And the way we looked at that is, and I've heard this talked about earlier, is when we acquire parkland, we need to be very cognizant of the maintenance responsibility associated with it. And for example, when we had the opportunity to acquire the open space lands, we also, with that, we have a huge responsibility now for the city parks to maintain that. And I don't know, and we weren't sure that there was any additional budget for that maintenance of those open space lands. So,
About $58,000.
so we'd like to get, we'd like to explore ways to boost the maintenance revenue for our parklands. And we also talked about that it's critical to obtain parklands prior to annexation, and that's really another key area with coordination between the city and county, and how can those two agencies work together to get out ahead of development and get those parklands now. And we have a lot more other detail, but I think so much of it was already reviewed and discussed.
I'd like to ask Janet, did you have any closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to share, or are you just thinking about everything you heard?
Wow, no, really great thoughts there. I really don't have any, well,
God, hand me the mic. Great thoughts. You know, so many of the plans that we're involved with really do come down to this money issue. And I would just encourage you all to, if we limit a plan to just the vision of what you can afford today, and you don't reach a little to come up with some new solutions, I think you'll have done yourselves a disservice. And I think plans are meant to be visionary, and it's okay that you work towards them. You may not achieve all of them, but that's the point. You've got to keep trying. And so I'm glad to hear you guys wrestling with all of that. So don't think your hands are tied. Change happens, and things really get done. What a great group. What great thoughts that came out of this. You guys are absolutely amazing. So we'll carry on from here and consider all of these thoughts and figure out from the Citizens Advisory Committee. Also, we'll have to figure out what to do with some of that new information. So, but I think overall, I'm hearing, you know, overall the plan's pretty good. I'm not hearing saying, wait a minute, we have totally forgot something. We're talking about some details here, so I hope you guys feel good about the efforts that the Citizens Advisory Committee has really put into this and have come up really close to what I think is really a great plan. So, and it will be by the end.
There, let's see, I had a board around here somewhere with the adoption schedule. Thank you. Dave, would you mind flipping up the welcome for just a moment? There's several steps in this yet that we need to go through. The first one is that I'm hopeful that the Citizens Advisory Committee is available for Wednesday night, April 7th. And if I could have a show of hands if you know already that there's no way, that would be great. Okay. Yeah. No way for Sarah or Bill on April 7th? Oh, more of a positive statement. Thanks, Bill. That's what we were talking about earlier tonight, Bill, how positive you always are, and we appreciate that. So I'll put out an email tomorrow asking about April 7th because some of our CAC left early. What I would like, any of the citizens here and those that have been visiting our website will be looking for responses from those folks as soon as mid-next week so that we can start compiling all the minutes and all the notes to bring it back to the CAC to digest and talk about some of the pros and cons and where do we insert things and all of that sort of thing. What we'd like to do next is take it to a joint city-county park board meeting, and Lisa and I have been talking about trying to coordinate a meeting like that in early April, followed by the planning board, which will probably happen on either April 20th or May 4th. We're going to try and figure that out this evening yet. Once that board has reviewed it, then we would be looking at coming to City Council and County Commissioners. One of the reasons the staff would like to get this plan adopted as soon as possible is because growth keeps happening at a rapid pace. And once we adopt this plan, as you all saw through all the actions and implementation, we have a whole ton of work to do to make some of this stuff happen. And so we're starting to get excited about making some of these things happen for the community. We will have an official set of meetings for you probably in about a week or so. And each one of those, the planning board, city council, county commission, will include a public hearing with the adoption process. And of course, city and county park boards have always been more than receptive to comments from citizens and really spend a lot of time with all of the citizen groups and are interested in hearing your comments. Anything else from any of the staff or the CAC members you can think of? Okay, if I could ask staff to try and organize the room for the planning board. And if you could leave, if you're done with this, just leave it here on the counter. Otherwise, please get it back to us by March 23rd. That would be great. Feel free for the next 20 minutes to write on the board up there, put your dots if you didn't get it in the notes already. And you can take that down, David. And we'll take down all of the tablets, and if we could rip off the sheets of paper so we can compile the notes. And then we'll put the clean tablets over here, and we'll get out of the way for the planning board.